promise to do one more talk today, and that is how to speak to an Agilista if you absolutely must. So the talk is a play on words on a book by Ann Coulter called How to Speak to a Liberal If You Absolutely Must. I did it a little bit for shock value. I think that I see the context-driven community and the Agile software community kind of lateral to each other. They're not in competition the way the factory or the quality schools might be, but we kind of don't know what to do with each other, right? So the experience report is based on a couple of years of kind of bashing my head against the wall with various people in the Agile community and realizing that what I was doing wasn't helpful and finding better ways to engage, discuss, debate, and dialogue. I should say that right now I'm working with a team that has a completely fully open space. All the work is displayed visibly on a Kanban board. We have 2-week iterations. All the estimating is done in terms of a whole team. And we track story points. So right now I'm kind of like living the Agile dream, right? One of the few companies that I know of in the Midwest that's actually doing end-to-end, full scope, full product owner, real Agile. So the tradition, I think someone has been speaking about this at the conference, and I agree with it, that the Agile movement came out of a couple of different places, but one of them was a very hardcore engineering developer-y practices. If you go back and look in the literature, extreme programming was started on a project at Chrysler in 1999 by a bunch of very, very strong programmers, and it was a payroll system. And you can go read the books. There's a book called Extreme Programming Installed where they say in very nice words, we don't need no stinking testers. Right? The idea being those testers, they are the guys that are always complaining about the specs being incomplete or inconsistent or incorrect. They're always whining about not having enough time. They're always whining they need to be involved up front. Then they file a bunch of bugs, which I don't know how to reproduce it, or don't really tell the stakeholders what's really going on, or they're counting these things we don't understand. We don't need no stinking testers. And it's very unfortunate that at that place in time, with that team, with those people, they were probably right. But I wouldn't want to generalize that to say you should never have a tester. It's been 12 years, 13 years since that book was published, and times have changed. And even the original authors of Extreme Programming Installed have told me in various different forums that, yeah, you know, depending on the size of your team, when you look at the risks involved on the project, especially if you have a GUI, payroll system doesn't have a GUI, right? So it's all batch. If you have a GUI, yeah, there's a certain kind of person that can add value on a project. Maybe not, the ratio's not going to be 1-to-1, but yeah, I can kind of see how you could have a tester. That's a sort of intellectual history. And there are a lot of people that have read this material, discovered extreme programming, typically CS degree types. Testing is something we should just automate the problem away. They do a lot of really good stuff. Unit tests are great. Acceptance test-driven development, where you create examples early in the process, which you can automate, I think can create very good confirmatory tests. So the problem is, like, how do I, as a tester, interact with these people, right? Earlier in my career, I gave a talk, and the guy in the middle row didn't really hear what I was saying. He missed a few key words in a few sentences, and he stood up and he pointed at me and he said, "That's bullshit, and someone needs to call you out on it," right? Can anybody guess how that went? Like, is that a positive way to interact? Right? The funny part was, I recorded the talk, so I could email him later and say, "Here's the MP3. Look at what I actually said. There's nothing to object to, is there?" So I was going for the apology, right? Well, that didn't work out either, because at this point the guy is too engaged in his position. Right now it's like us versus them, and to admit anything other would be to lose face. The first lesson is, dealing with an Agilista, you can't fight them head on, especially not in public. If someone's giving a talk, and you challenge them in an environment like this, if your goal is to actually learn something and not have a fight, Like, you're not playing to the audience and trying to get the audience to be convinced of your side, but you actually want to have a real dialogue, that's probably not going to go over that great. So I suggest a different approach. If I wanted to use an analogy, it would be more like bullfighting, right? Now, I don't know anything about bullfighting, and I'm talking totally outside of my experience. But the one thing I know is you don't fight the bull, right? You tire the bull out. So I have learned from some of those earlier experiences. And when I get to someone who still has this, we don't need no stinking testers, there's a few questions you can ask, right? Like, what if you just involved me early in the process to do exploratory testing as a part-time contractor for just like a couple hours, and all I can do is give you bug reports and disappear? Would that have value? And if I think about it, and it's probably a skill, and yeah, probably all developers should all do that, but we don't have that skill here, so if you taught us that, that would be valuable. Yeah, okay. All right. How about the design of the automated tests? Have you studied, like, what makes a good test? Well, it's pretty straightforward and simple, isn't it? Now you're going to have a conversation. And again, I wouldn't do it in public. So if you can, buy them a beer after work. If you can't do that, try to get them to come downstairs for coffee. If you can't do that, to pull them aside. Sometimes if you find a particularly interesting bug, like we had one of the clients I work with, and I can show it to you after. I recorded it with Snagit, with the video recorder thing, where when you click delete, a little message pops up saying something went wrong. And about 2 seconds later, that message is replaced with Dr. Heusser was deleted successfully. So something did go wrong. Now, we don't want our but it worked. Interesting little problem. Well, we don't want the customers to just ignore something went wrong messages because they know they're going to get confirmation later. It's a broken window, right? We have sociological evidence that when in inner cities, when a car will go without being broken into for months, but if you break a window, all of a sudden it's fair game, and it'll be stripped in hours, right, or weeks, or quickly. Is my point. So when your application has broken windows, there are real bugs in there, but people don't really care or report them because it's just that, you know, this automated test always reports an error somewhere around line 37, so don't worry about it. Right. So it's definitely a bug we definitely want fixed, but our automation is never going to find it. Typical test automation is going to wait till the page is fully loaded and the JavaScript is run and make sure that this message is there, which it in fact is. You'd have to know to wait until the page is half loaded and wait for a specific line of text to not be there while the page is half loaded. So you find a few examples of that kind of bug, preferably screen captures, and then you start having a conversation about how could we add value, fitting into whatever the Agile worldview is. One way to do that is this constant discussion of testers should be involved early and upfront in creating requirements. So, as a tester, we have the story, we have the feature, whatever we call it. Can we create some examples at the bottom so that the developer can know when he's done because the acceptance test run? That doesn't mean the story is actually done. That just means that now it's good enough for a person to test it. Like, as someone has said many times this week, don't waste my time with something an intern could find bugs in, right? So the process of creating those acceptance tests, in my experience, has a lot to do with these boundaries and equivalent classes and combinatorics and error guessing and things that testers are really pretty good at. So what I'm saying is, we don't challenge them in public. We find a way to talk to them in private where no one is going to lose face. We acknowledge their awesomeness and their specific skills. We try to find ways that we can work together to get a better result. And what I'm saying is that when I've taken that approach, it has gone much better than that's bullshit. Right? Shocking. And I'm ready for questions. Yeah. I mean, like quarterly about. It depends. I'm really, really heavily involved in the writing speaking community, so I probably see it more often than you do, right? So I'm talking to these people who are world changers and have got it all figured out and they've got their methodology they're going to present. And I'm trying to find a way to engage with them in a way that's helpful or at least doesn't hurt relationships, right? I'm actively working to advance the cause of context-driven testing on a larger scale. That's where the experiences come from. But there's a couple of people, I've worked with people very recently that have had this discussion. I had a guy say, we're talking about automating database testing. And he says, why don't we just write a tool to compare any table with any other table so that we can generalize, and for any database application we can just run this tool and get answers back. Then we wouldn't need to test it. We wouldn't need MAT, right? I had that at a retrospective very recently. What's not an acceptable answer?
Using a tool to allegedly validate that a human being isn't, the FDA will not accept the fact that you allege that a tool is fully qualified. You have to do some process to document and take responsibility for that particular fact.
I'm not working in a regulated environment. So there are other environments where we can make the argument with, like, the law says this, sorry, but I think I get what you're saying.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry. No problem. Your shot.
Yeah, so fortunately I don't have that specific problem where our developers don't see any need for testing. The problem I seem to run across...
Oh, they do see need for testing. They just want to automate all of it, right? All of it.
Actually, automated heavily, they don't like the maintenance aspect of it.
Good. That shows significant maturity.
Yeah, I think we have a really good development team. The problem I have is they're so story-driven. And stories are awesome, and stories are very granular, but they don't really paint the whole picture. And they don't like to stop and think, say, hey, I'm done with my part of it. This is kind of like your arena. You figure out where everything else is. This little story might have broken everything with the rest of it. And it's getting them to stop and think and say, hey, what could this change actually do? You know, in context, or sometimes it's just, you know, you have bad old code, which, you know, has a lot of, you know, things you didn't expect it to touch, but it does.
I think it's a pretty good opportunity to partner, because we as the testers can say, what about this, what about this, what about this, what about this, because we're trained to think critically, and other people just don't have those skills. But we're probably not the right people to go write the tool to go check this, 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 this. We might do it manually a time or two, but if it's a real risk that occurs periodically because we are shipping often, we want to partner, and I think that can work pretty well. No kidding. All right. Oh.
What question do you want from us? What question did we not ask?
I was kind of expecting at this point to hear either I'm having this specific problem, Matt, can you help me out, or not. And if not, I think we're done. Right? The best situation I could think we could be in is this question is irrelevant. Wouldn't that be nice?
Now you have one. Excellent. 33.
So we are doing Scrum, but we have multiple Scrum groups. And we have one tester. We have two testers that are involved in every single group. And they all come at the same time. And of course, all the time, it's 3-week development. All in at the same time. So how do you explain to them that I can only help so many? And how do you get across to all the groups that you need to kind of pick what is most important?
Right.
Like you said, they have all these cool stories that I've heard about.
So it sounds, there's a couple issues there, right? It sounds to me like, one, we're doing, so the initial definition of Scrum, the initial definition was you get everybody in a room, you say, we've got a really interesting problem. I know it usually takes 90 days. You've got 30. If you can pull it off, you're going to save the company. Figure it out, right? That was the initial definition of Scrum. And it's been kind of ritualized since then, and that has pros and cons. But it sounds like you're leaning more toward this sort of classic definition of Scrum, than some of the modern rules-based implementations. So it sounds to me, as a process naturalist, like there's a bottleneck in test. Whether test is under-resourced or the timing of it is coming out wrong, because ideally we'd be putting stories up, like at the beginning of those iterations, the testers have much to do. Are they busy?
We do 3 weeks of development, and then we have a week of where we're supposed to show it to the public, get feedback, and then do planning for the next week. So while you're trying to catch up with testing, they're already planning. So you're in the planning meetings and you're doing end of testing at the same week, and then you start all over again.
Right, so the parallel pipeline can be very, very challenging to pull off successfully. That's just very challenging. I would be looking at ways to move that into we're all on the same pipeline. So, gosh, who was it? I want to say it was Goldrat who said that work in progress inventory is waste. Excessive work in progress inventory is waste, right? So I worked with one company where they had these analysts, and these analysts could like dream stuff up. So, and they were measured by how many requirements documents they produced. So we had this huge, ridiculous, like, we're 750 requirements documents behind. Now we're 800 requirements documents behind. And once you actually worked all your way to the bottom of the stack, you're working on something the requirements analyst was thinking of 6 months ago, who might have left the company or might not be available to talk to you because they're on some other project. So you're looking at a document that doesn't make any sense to you. It's waste, right? So one of the ideas behind Kanban is excessive work-in-progress inventory is waste. So if people are working on new stuff, we haven't even finished the old stuff. We've got a lot going on here. And we have a bottleneck in test that we don't have a way of visualizing. So if we had some way of getting everybody on the same page and saying we can only have, all right, do you have stories? You said you have multiple teams, right?
Yeah.
So you probably have like, there's 15 stories in QA right now, kind of a thing, right? So if we can limit work in progress to 3, we're only going to work on 3 stories in QA at a time because we only have 2 testers. Right? Doesn't make sense for us to work on it. Then the devs should have work in progress limits as well, and they can't move a story to QA because there's no place to put it. So they've got to find some way to do something that's valuable. And the only thing the devs can do at that point is help the testers. Crazy, right? But so if they're continuing to do story work, development work, and test is blocked, they're generating waste, right? They're building up work in progress inventory. So
I've got 3 people in queue right now on the same thread.
so I can give you afterward. I'll give you some references that there are.
So I am also a fan of the Kanban approach, and in my context at least, I go to my manager and say, I'm being overwhelmed and I'm causing delays in the project. I only want to work on 2 or 3 tasks at a time. They're generally very happy to hear this because that means that I'll have more consistent performance, which comforts them. So I would applaud the Kanban approach, even if it's just for you and you say, I have 3 tokens, and I've used up all my tokens, you have to wait.
Yeah, and some developers will get geeked out by that, and they'll write little helper tools for you to make your work faster. Some people will just hate it. Like, you're going to be a QA for a couple of days till we can they hate it. And they will go to your manager and say, you need to hire more testers. You need to give them more staff. They're overworked, right? Which is good because you have an outside observer reflecting on the status of the. So the system effects around that are pretty good, in my experience.
Okay, 17? I'm sorry, 15.
I also mentioned I use Kanban as well. I was fearful of it at the beginning, but because I was worried about developers doing testing, but I actually found that they were very enthusiastic about it. And like Matt said, they find more creative ways to make you do your work faster. They become very committed to that, and they see that in the end, I think they prefer it over Scrum because they really like to be able to work in things and flows and do the rest of the planning's more kind of iterative, not like having these day-long or week-long planning sessions. You can kind of do it more within the flow of Kanban. So developers will like it too.
Want to add to that? Or?
No, No.
One more.
You can get one more. Sure. Go for it.
17, and then this is the end, because we're,
I just wanted to come to your problem there, because we tried both things. We had during, well, we have about 5 or 6 different drug cases. And in the beginning, the developers actually helped out testing, but unfortunately, some of the testing was quite poor because they really didn't want to test.
That's if they probably don't have critically thinking is a skill. And there are a couple of different things we can do about that. But when we put devs on it, they're going to be like, well, this was easy. I don't know why it takes a tester 2 days to test a story. I did it in an hour. And they're going to ship it out. It's going to be buggy, right? And that's an opportunity for learning. Try to do it on your low-risk projects, though, right?
But now actually we have at least one test.
Maybe we could talk after. I might have a few things that might be helpful.
okay, with that, we are done.
Yep. Thank you.
For